All right, everyone. So, all right, want to thank Con Ed for the great presentation and being a great sponsor. It was really great that they were able to highlight in their chat some of the projects we're going to be talking about today. So, first of all, I want to thank Nick from LCOR, Brooke from Lendlease, and Sara from L&M Development for graciously agreeing to be on my panel today. So, all right, it's one of the goals in bringing NY-GEO downstate was to try to be able to drive developers to come. Every year I would go to my development crew, I would go, hey, you guys want to go to Albany? And about the sound that you guys are making right now is the reaction I would get. So I do want to thank Sara and Lendlease for trekking to Albany in the past. It's a lot easier to ask them to take a subway ride to Brooklyn for a few hours than the Amtrak up to Albany. And looking through the registration list, it seems we got about 25 developers, developers, university, and clients to come. So we're no longer this small niche industry conference where we go, yay, Geo's the best. We actually have people that are working on geothermal projects that have made the decision. Oftentimes wondering if they made the right decision to go geo on their projects. And you can tell I have worked with these people, so, and anyone that has done a geothermal project, if anyone ever tells you everything went perfectly, they are lying or they did not do a project. So, these are kind of the early adopters of geothermal out there. So, I'll just let each of them, spend a minute or two, just kind of introduce themselves and, the company and, the project or projects that they're working on right now. So, Nick, if you want to get started with that, and then I have some questions.
Thanks, Zach. I'm Nick Pasquenza, Senior Vice President of Construction and Development for LCOR. We're a multifamily developer operating on the East Coast from Boston down to Miami. The first geothermal project we did was in Coney Island. It's a 461 unit project, 30% affordable, 2 towers. And we're currently working on a project in New Rochelle. The project is under construction, but the geothermal system is drilled and in place. And we're about to start a project in New Jersey, in Hoboken, that'll also be geothermal.
Cool. Thank you, Nick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Nicholson with Lendlease Development. I lead what we call development operations, which is basically design, construction, and delivery. I work on the One Java project that was mentioned by Con Ed. Thanks for the shout out. And yeah, large scale geothermal, which I'm sure we'll talk about in this panel.
Hi. Oop. Microphones make me awkward, just letting everyone know. So do big rooms, Zach. I'm Sara Levenson. I'm a managing director at L&M Development Partners. We've been working in the geothermal space since about 2017. We started our geothermal work in the Rockaways, so all of our ground-up work in the Rockaways is geothermal. We're going to be starting construction on our first district geothermal system out in Arvern in 2025. We also have projects in Brownsville, Brooklyn, a large campus in East New York, and we're also working and exploring geothermal throughout the city and have projects also in design in the Bronx. I think my team gave me some numbers. I think all in all, between projects that are operational, in design, and construction, we have over about 4,000 units across 22 projects throughout the city that are ongoing now.
So for those of you that had counted, there's about 5,500 units of geothermal represented on the stage right now, a little more, 6,000. So, it's coming. And it's great. A few years ago, if someone told me that we would have, tens of thousands of units in product development and going live and residents moving in, I would have told you were crazy. So, great. And I want to thank, Nick and Brooke for letting their sites be site tours on Monday. We weren't exactly sure how that would work out, and I heard rave reviews. Unfortunately, that means we're going to have to do it again as the person that needs to organize them. But no, it was really great that people were able to see the hands-on and, see how the projects were implemented and, what a geothermal system looks like. Spoiler alert, after it's drilled, you don't really see anything. So people walk through and they go, so what do I see? I'll tell a story that Sarah's about to yell at me for, which is when we designed Beach Green Dunes 2, we put the geothermal manifold in where we thought was the best location. Turns out it's next to the trash compactor.
It is the most visited trash compactor room in all of New York City.
It is also the cleanest trash compactor room in all of New York City.
True.
So in the next project that we're designing, the manifold is behind a plexiglass wall that you can see from the front lobby, from the leasing office.
And it's lit.
Backlit, LED lights. We haven't quite figured out what we're doing yet, but it is going to be the most beautiful geothermal manifold in New York City. Oh, thanks. So if anyone forgets my name, I now know it in front of me. No, so Nick, do you mind explaining a little bit why LCOR decided, so LCOR's was the first high-rise geothermal, project. When I heard LCOR was going for a 26-story building with geothermal, my original thought was, are they crazy? But it turns out it's working out well, and can you give a little bit of your insight about why you decided to do it? You made the decision change mid-construction, which is something that we see fairly common right now. So, some projects are envisioned from geothermal from the beginning. You started looking at it early, but, pulled the trigger at some point.
Yeah, so we were introduced to the concept of geothermal from L&M, as they were the earliest of the adopters. And we had a project in Coney Island. It was a 70,000 square foot site, which is rare in New York. So we had some real estate to put in a bore field. And like any other project, as we started the design process, we evaluated different mechanical systems. And we specifically evaluated them as it relates to local law 97 and what it may mean 20 years from now. So we quickly ruled out PTAX. We landed at VRF, or water source heat pump, conventional. But this idea of geothermal was still out there because it's a green technology. So we're supportive of that as a concept, but also it felt like the most future-proofed option we could choose with growing penalties for carbon emissions. So we chose water source heat pump to buy ourselves that option to convert to geothermal in the future and not have to make the decision day one of the design process and keep the design moving. So concurrent with our design process, we started to meet with anyone and everyone we could hear about who did geothermal to try to get as smart as we could get and decide if it was something that we were comfortable with. And it took a while, lots of meetings. It was during COVID, so everything was virtual. And we landed on a partner who was going to provide us with a turnkey system and a guarantee on the operational savings. So it de-risked our first initiative. We had a design build, and we had a guarantee that the system would operate for 20 years. So we chose to go with that approach, and it was interesting. After spending several months meeting with lots of different people, settling on our partner, our kickoff meeting with that partner had all those people we had talked to assembled into the same team. So we learned very quickly back then it was a pretty small world. It's grown, but still a pretty small world. So like Zach said, at that point then we made the conversion from conventional to conventional water source heat pump to a geothermal system, which was harder than we thought it would be. But we didn't, we had the basic infrastructure. The units didn't have to get changed because it's still a water source heat pump. But things like having to put glycol into the building loop, growing the pipe size, insulating the pipes, grew our enclosures, all the additional electric infrastructure. So it wasn't easy, but in light of our lack of knowledge going in, we needed the time to be able to get to a point where we felt comfortable. And I will say that the incentives side of it was really important. The Con Ed clean heat and the NYSERDA incentives that we also secured through our agreement with our partner made a huge difference in us being able to make the financial case for the geothermal system as well.
Yeah, and so I see Donovan's here and the NYSERDA team. All three of these projects were awarded PON 4614 funding, whether for design or construction or both. And they were, in my opinion, instrumental in trying to move the projects across the finish line. So, Sara, do you want to talk a little bit about the affordable housing lens and why geothermal makes sense in affordable housing? Both Brooke and Nick, are doing market rate projects, 421A projects, so they're 30% affordable. Sara's projects, L&M Development, is mainly an affordable housing developer, so they're typically 100% affordable.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the mechanics of getting comfortable with geothermal that Nick had described, we had gone through in 2017. Our first project was an 100% affordable housing project, basically oceanfront in Rockaway. We knew, just generally speaking, as a development company, new construction or real estate development is a big driver of carbon emissions, and it was very important to us on our Arvin project. First and foremost is we don't go a day without talking about resiliency or energy efficiency. And so, we knew that that was great for, future generations and trying to offset all of our carbon to the best of our ability, but also with all of this energy efficiency that pairs really well with resiliency, there are also operational savings that come with these super efficient buildings and assets. And so I think that's really important as an affordable housing owner and developer. We really hold a lot of our assets long-term and are considered integral parts of the community. That's usually our strategy. So making sure that we could have operating buildings with low operating costs, but also able to pass through some of those benefits to our affordable residents was really, really exciting for us to be able to do.
Awesome, thanks, Sara. And Brooke, do you want to share a little bit about why Lendlease? So you weren't the first high-rise, but you're now the tallest. And I love how both projects claim to be the largest geothermal projects in New York State. Donovan mentioned it yesterday. And, it's a really interesting time for geothermal because, what does the largest mean? I have a lot of these philosophical debates and questions with my clients. And there's a lot of different largest. We'll have to, eventually come up with like a supercomputer list of, the largest geothermal projects, and we can, as an industry, vote of how to rank them. But, every day there's a call about a potentially larger project, a taller building, greater density, more boreholes. Can we integrate, waste heat recovery? Can we use the river? You have a waterfront site. You just want to explain, just talk a little bit through what Lendlease's, philosophy when you were looking at it was?
Yeah, so we bought the site in late 2020. So local law 94 was already, was already in effect. We knew the penalties were coming. Local law 154, which was the all-electric building, we knew was coming as well. Lendlease itself had an all-electric mandate at that stage. And, we also knew with our location, along the Greenpoint Williamsburg waterfront, there's been extensive development. So, Con Ed was doing a lot of work on the infrastructure there. There were a lot of buildings coming online, stealing a lot of the power that was, not stealing, that's probably the wrong word, taking a lot of the power that was available there. So there were many factors coming into this project. And we sort of actually all just sat in a room and went like, kind of not dissimilar to what Nick said, like, this is a large footprint for New York City. It's 2.4 acres. We are still a 0 lot line building even at that size, but we were like, okay, we're on the water. It's a big site. Like, let's see if this could even work here. So we started to do our research, and I actually have to give a lot of credit to the two people and companies sitting next to me, because when we learned about both their projects, it gave us a lot of confidence that, like, we could do this. I mean, we do claim to be the largest, 834 units. You're done, we're not done, so, we'll battle that out. But, we had really only done it or seen it, kind of in more of a, not industrial, that's not the word, institutional sense, not so much for residential, how it worked for the heat pumps. And then we somehow found Zach. I will give a shout out to Zach here, who sort of brought us up to speed on what NYSERDA was doing, up to speed on what Con Ed was doing. And, it kind of just all almost magically came together in theory. I think when we got down to sort of how it was designed, we ended up with 15 on-center boreholes as well as a full pile-supported building. That's where the reality that Zach talked about kind of set in, and that became tough. But I think, from an early inception stage, geothermal just ticked a lot of boxes. We could make it work. We believed in it, and we had some great examples to lean on. So that's sort of how we got there.
Yeah. So 320 boreholes. I forget how many piles, hundreds of piles.
585.
And you show up on any given day and you go, what did we get ourselves into? I remember being there one day and there's 10 drill rigs on site between pile driving and geothermal, and I go, wow, we've made it. So, this is what goes on in my head, because you go from, the original site was a warehouse with very cool graffiti in it, I have to say. So it was like an abandoned warehouse. Once upon a time, they threw giant rave parties. I was not invited, though, prior to them owning the site. And
we found a bunch of like glow sticks and alcohol inside. I'm not even kidding you. When we opened the doors to this warehouse that we had just spent a lot of money on.
We're there trying to figure out where to drill a test loop. And we're like, maybe we'll drill it inside the building. Maybe we'll drill it on this pier that I can tell the story now. We weren't quite sure was going to support the weight of the drill rig when we drilled the test loop. So there's always some great stories that you get at the end that you can look back on and say, wow, it actually worked out. So one Java, between the combination of the NYSERDA and the Con Ed incentives, if I can add correctly, ended up with a little over $9 million of incentives. Just for other developers and people in the room, that was prior to Con Ed changing the rebate program, so now there's $1 million cap. But they were also some of the early adopters where costs were not quite as defined. So Brooke, if you don't mind, do you just want to talk a little bit about, kind of the growth that you saw? So they went out and their construction division went out and said, we need 5 geothermal drill rigs and we need them next month or something like that. And, the industry was like, awesome, but we're not quite ready, to staff a job like that. And you went a little bit through the growing pains of industry. And now, for your next project, hopefully, we'll be a little bit more prepared as an industry.
Yeah, I think, and Zach, you were with us all along, and I'd love to hear how you guys experienced this too. But when we did the math on how many drill rigs we needed to maintain some level of schedule that we could still support, it was a lot. And we looked at putting multiple drillers together. I think we were bidding this for almost 8 months, I want to say. We almost got down to the point where we had to go, if we don't get people to come to site and drill, we're going to have to go back, which I'm not sure how we would have done that either, quite frankly, at that stage. And then, we started working with LCOR and subsequently Geosource, who was a driller out of Canada. There were a lot of drillers in Canada. That's what I learned, that Canada was well ahead of us in that capacity. I forget the other driller in Canada. I would give them a shout out too, but I can't recall. Geosource came in, brought some really great technology, and really kind of saved us at the last minute. LCOR and Geosource, that is. Sorry, I should mention both, of course. We really did almost get to a point. And I think now, right, there's new technologies. I also want to mention, we did only go the 499 feet. I think that's changing, and a lot of people are going deeper now, which I think will make these urban projects a lot more feasible. You won't have to go 15 feet on center and do all of that. So I think, the drill availability was our biggest holdup, I would say.
And just to echo the change in the 500-foot rule, as a lot of people are aware, by being able, if we were able to drill 850, 950-foot holes on the site, we probably would have been somewhere in the 175 holes range. Geology on that site had relatively deep bedrock for, a waterfront site. And we did removable casing to be able to save money. So if we could have drilled 850s, which is, what we're drilling now and what the Toronto market was, where Geosource came down from, it would have saved several months of construction schedule. And
yeah, and I actually just want to mention one more thing. As I mentioned, we did think about this early, but what we learned was, there's actually a capability for the thermal drilling to go first before the pile driving, or before that, where they can cut it off below. So there's a lot of stuff that we learned, and there's a lot of different ways to solve the problem. So I guess, the message there is, just like talk to people. There's different ways, and you really do have to think about it from the very, very beginning, because you can make your life a lot easier that way as well.
Perfect, yeah. So Nick, you're starting to have residents move into 1515 Surf. Any initial feedbacks from, the residents or the operation team that you can share?
Yeah, it's actually been really positive. So we're leasing up now. We have, it's a younger demographic for a lot of our projects, and they are keyed into sustainability. And so some of them will show up to the building for a tour unaware of the geothermal system, and it's part of our spiel for the marketing sales pitch, and the feedback is very positive. But what's even more interesting is there are a substantial number of people coming to the building because they are aware that's a geothermal building, and they want to. Some of them are probably just kicking tires because they're curious, but there are others, which is fine. We'll take anybody, right? Come take a look. But there are some who want to live in it because it is a geothermal building, because it is sustainable. So it's been, we always sort of thought of the marketing side of it as an ancillary benefit that we would get, and now we're seeing it. I can't tell you we're charging more rent because of it, but if it's driving traffic, that's still a huge win.
And one of the, interesting economics of, market rate buildings that we typically see is that there's an energy savings, largely to the developer, but there's also a small savings to the tenants. So it's not just that the developers, are making more money on their operational cost and, in turn charging more rent. The end tenants do benefit from it as well, not only by carbon emission, but by having, a small bill impact. And as, it gets hotter outside, air conditioning costs less, and that's a big benefit. And I will say in both 1515 Surf and One Java, we are heating their swimming pools with geothermal, which is a point that I love. Haven't convinced either one of them yet to have an extended pool season, but we have excess heat, so if you want to keep it open in the winter. There was a joke early on about, beach volleyball and, or pool volleyball, I guess, in, Christmas time. So, I'm in, by the way, if you guys decide to do that. Like, you got to keep lobbying on these projects now. Cool. All right. So, so I guess, we'll take some audience questions in a few minutes, but one of the things I want to ask is, like, if you were talking to another developer and they said, should we do geothermal? Besides saying you're crazy, you're going to lose a year of your life, I'm going to get a lot of, gray or silver hair, so someone keeps correcting me. I have at least one for each of these projects. Is there just some, quick advice that you would give someone around, what to consider in, the onset of looking at a project?
Stay strong. You can do it. I think planning, as Brooke alluded to, is really everything. Your team is very, very important. Your consultants, model it out. Make sure it's right for your project. I think every single project is different. What's great that we've learned from our first project to now about GEO is it is fluid, and you can pivot and do different executions and different strategies depending on where you are and what you're doing. Understand the regulatory requirements as well, and make sure you're planning accordingly. Are you within 200 feet of an MTA asset? What is your DOB filing strategy going to look like? I think those are some of the longer runway things. And one thing that, from a lessons learned from our first project is we were so focused on planning, getting to construction loan origination, getting out of the ground, and placing the building in service. I think it's also really important to think about what happens when you place the building in service, your commissioning, and the initial startup of the systems. What is that going to look like? Who's going to support you on that? How do you train your site staff? Because this equipment and the BMS are very, very different than when you're doing fossil fuel or even other types of building systems. And also the ongoing maintenance, making sure that your staff on site is understanding of what needs to happen, whether it's with an issue with the heat pump within a unit or something on the physical plan of the building. Just making sure that your site team is empowered and knowledgeable will also set you up for success.
Agree with everything Sara just said. I think one thing that maybe people don't think about if you're a developer is, I think, like, reach out to the other developers who have done it. you know, traditionally us developers can be a little competitive and not so much share information. But what I found, you know, on the geothermal front is that kind of we're all learning still. And that, you know, people really do see this, even though it's an extremely old technology, as a future technology. And, you know, this is kind of the first time in my career that I've really experienced kind of the excitement around it, everybody coming together, everybody trying to help, lots of shared knowledge, like nobody's afraid to be like, this is where we messed up, this is where we did well. And that was something unique to the geothermal. We don't talk about anything else in the building amongst each other other than the geothermal systems, but, you know, so I would just say, like, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody you know has done it. Obviously I'm sure there's many connected people in this room, but, you know, I think that was something that was different for me, where I had a lot of developers that were willing to tell me their horror stories. And, you know, that was kind of the first time that there was that open and honest dialogue.
Yeah, definitely. There was a time period that I had to make a deal with a developer that I would say, all right, I will have this developer talk to you and I'll get them to show your site. But when I have a new potential client or a new developer or a new regulator that's interested, you have to say yes, because that deal only worked. And luckily we have enough sites now that I no longer need to make that deal. But I do want to thank all three of them for being very gracious, that when I call them up and say, hey, can I bring someone by like in an hour? They typically say yes, and they ask me for more notice in the future. But you know, they are very willing to share their experiences and their technology and their learnings. And I actually think all three of them had talked to each other at some point during the processes, you know, of their projects, which was interesting as well, where I would get a phone call and say, hey, I was talking to so-and-so, and they said, don't do this. And I would go, oh, no. No specific examples, but no. All right. So Nick, you want to?
Yeah, I think from an overarching theme is, while it's challenging and hard to learn and get comfortable with, what about our business isn't? So we owe a debt of gratitude to EcoSave, who we partnered with on the first project. They gave us the guarantee. They stood by with Zach. They were by our side, helping us, educating us, talking us off the ledge, doing the driller math for us. And we got through it. And what we've determined is, like anything else we do, if we hire the right consultants and we hire the right contractors and we work with them, we can execute on geothermal just like anything else we do. And in some respects, it's simpler. Not the first part of your project, that's way harder, but getting the building online, you don't need to get your fire protection system done, to get your gas authorization, to get your boiler started, to get your temporary heat. We had temporary heat, I mean, the quickest I've ever had temporary heat on a project, because some of the startup is actually easier. So, I think folks like EcoSave, like Zach, like other companies that are providing these holistic turnkey approaches are really important to moving the industry forward. And I still want to find ways to partner with folks like that, because what's the next green technology that we're going to want to adopt? And we're going to want to rely on someone like that to help us with it. But on a go-forward basis, we treat it just like anything else, any other part of our business. And what it's done is it's driven the economics into a more favorable position, where the operational savings is making these decisions to go geothermal pretty easy. Now, granted, we have one project that's been online for a few months, so a year from now, I may have been completely wrong, but early indications are that this is an approach that we can repeat and get more confident at it each time.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. All right, so I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions that we can ask. Do we have a third microphone, or we have to steal one of these? All right. Oh, we have a third microphone. I'll let you choose.
Thanks. Ron Kamen, Earth and Energy Consulting. So I work with a lot of developers, and part of their concern about geothermal, besides the technical and all the other, is the additional capital cost versus the operational cost. A lot of developers, as you go, are either flipping the building or planning to flip the building, so they don't care about the long-term operational cost, or they're putting all those operational costs on the tenants, so their technology choices are really like, what's my least capital? I don't care about the operational. Could you speak to how you see this developing? And you guys seem to like hold your assets versus somebody who's going to flip it or pushing the operational cost to the tenants.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I do think all three of us up here hold our buildings, so we have the whole life cycle and the whole picture. But I mean, even if you're going to sell it, right, if you can prove up that your operating costs are less and you've got case studies now, that just translates to value on the back end when you're selling the building. I mean, it's a pretty simple math equation there, I would say. So I think people just need to believe in it and look at it and be able to quantify what that OpEx savings is, and depending on how you're charging your tenants. And with affordable, it's a whole different ball game. There's lots of things you can look into, but I think you just have to believe in the OpEx savings and take it into account when you're looking to sell that building and what that does to your value.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we've done engineering studies to project the operating savings, capitalize that, and we'll find out, but it pays for itself, essentially. And we're going to obviously track that very closely on our first projects and subsequent projects. But what I would say, just as a kind of current market conditions issue, the incentives and the tax credits are also helping the economics, obviously. But what is challenging is having to capitalize that additional cost up front to get a benefit later. Because when money's cheap, that becomes really accretive to the underwriting. But when money's as expensive as it is right now, both debt and equity, then that upfront capitalization does make it harder. It certainly makes it harder. We're still moving forward with it, but it's in these market conditions, it's definitely more challenging.
Zach.
Yeah, hi. Can you guys talk about the metering you install for the tenants and how you charge for heating or cooling to the tenants in the buildings?
Ours is pretty, I'm going to call it dumb. I'm hoping these guys have a better answer for you. We only charge for electric. So we have like a SATEC or a QuadLogic, the electronic metering system beyond our Con Ed meters. And the only thing we charge tenants for is electric. So we're not really confident that we're capturing the value we could be there. I think that will be a lesson learned for next time. So I'm curious with these two.
Yeah, I think the metering conversation was something that we're getting smarter about. And I would say there's definitely more meters that we now have on our newer buildings versus our original geothermal buildings. Zach will know this. On our building that we're placing in service probably at the end of the year, which is 100% electric, GEO, passive house, solar, renewable size to offset our house loads, we're metering everything. I think what we were having a hard time with, because we do this recipe, so to speak, of geothermal, passive house, and renewables, it was hard to really understand the specific impact of the GEO alone. So we're putting meters, BTU meters on our heat pumps and trying to understand what the base building loads are. We're doing it on the individual tenants, but it's really for our data collection more than anything. From our affordable housing standpoint, on our rental properties, owner takes responsibility for heat and hot water. But these are fully electrified buildings, so the tenant meters or the tenant plug loads and cooling is on the tenant. So I think, kind of a long story short to say, we keep adding more meters. And data is really, really important, especially when you manage your assets, but also just as the industry is evolving, everybody's looking for performance data at this point.
Yeah. So what we'll typically see is for market rate projects, developers are not, there's probably one out there, but I don't know of a developer right now in the New York City market that's charging a thermal fee, for usage to their tenants. That, the heat pump gets wired to the tenant electric meter. When they run heating and cooling, they pay that usage. In affordable housing, because the developers are required to provide that heat and hot water, we have a relay that switches between meters for heating and cooling. And that way, the developer pays the heating side, the tenant pays the cooling side, and the property owner and the landlord is not in between trying to track down a thermal fee, needing to lock out cooling access and kind of being the bad guys at the end of the day. No offense to the Con Ed people, they would have liked the utility to be the bad guy and determine, if they turn off the meter or, what happens. They don't want to be in the utility business necessarily. And my request is, as people ask questions, if you can say your name and company name, just so we have it for the recording.
Billy Roberti, Green Choices Consulting. I was wondering if the three of you could brainstorm on some ideas on how to incentivize developers who don't pay taxes.
Well, so we're a REIT, so we technically don't pay income tax when not technically, we don't pay income tax when we get there. So right now, the only tax benefit we're exploring is the IRA one, and there's a marketplace for it now, is my understanding. They've changed, or originally there wasn't, now they've changed it. I'm looking at Zach because he's like my expert on these things. So we would just be doing it the same way that we've perhaps sold solar credits on other properties as well. But that's my.
And I'll give a plug. We have 2 panels coming up on IRA, transferability and sale and everything else, including some really great experts that I'm really happy we were able to get to come to the conference. And those 2 sessions happen immediately after this. They also didn't tell us that to be a geothermal consultant, somehow you have a minor MBA in business, a minor in tax credit sales. You know, I can't tell you the number of times we end up on a call and I'm like, oh, we're talking tax credits today. That wasn't on the agenda, let's do it. So it's really interesting to see how all the developers put their deals together, which, you know, just like developers don't really talk to each other, the consultants never see how a deal go together. So it's the unique nature of geothermal right now. I think we'll take one more question, and then I have one final question for the panelists.
I actually have a follow-up question. They're not for profit. They are companies that could make a profit, but they tend to use depreciation and flipping to zero out their tax appetite. Not-for-profits can, of course, get the IRA direct pay. They can't get that either because they're not a not-for-profit. They just don't pay taxes.
Billy, I'll answer that. The IRA is transferable. So for non-for-profits, there's direct pay that you fill out a form, you file it as part of your 990, and you eventually get a check back as part of your organizational tax returns for, you know, a traditional nonprofit. We have found that like golf clubs, nonprofit social clubs are in that category. So it's not just, you know, 501c6s that you would think of as your traditional nonprofits. There's a whole long list that I never knew actually existed as nonprofits. But then there's transferability that you can sell the tax credit once as well. And that's pretty much what all of our market rate developers are going to do. You know, ideally hope to do. You know, that's still a relatively new market for geothermal, and exactly when the credits vest and when they sell and everything else will be covered kind of extensively in the next sessions. But there is a way to monetize the tax credits for traditional, you know, developers that have depreciation carry forward and, you know, are for-profit entities, but, you know, whether they don't have tax liability or, you know, every development deal has different JV partners in it and, you know, grouping together. So you might have a developer that has 50 projects and pays taxes somewhere along the line. They might not have, you know, that entity is a different group of people, so they need the money to come back into that project and not the parent company. So where the money goes to is, you know, is the concern. So transferability solved that. Prior to the IRA, just so everyone understands, the only projects that were able to really monetize the tax credits, which was a 10% tax credit at the time, were the affordable housing projects. And the other interesting thing is both 1515 SURF and 1Java started before the IRA was passed. I call them my unicorn projects, that they kind of got the industry, you know, they got the pitfalls of the industry not being quite, you know, up to speed for their size projects. But at the same time, they, you know, they were safe harbored from the prevailing wage and the apprenticeship requirements. And then they didn't have the cap on the Con Ed incentives, and they were able to take advantage of, you know, construction cost subsidies under PON 4614. So I think those projects, you know, big picture, will be the best economics we'll ever see. All right, so one last question for each of you. which is, if there was a technology or something that the industry would do differently. We have a lot of people representing, everything from regulators to utilities to consultants to drillers to equipment manufacturers. If there's is it a product? Is a technology? Is it the industry working better together? What is the one thing that the industry could do to help, geothermal become, I hate to use the word mainstream because I've been doing this for 16 years and every year it's, let's make geothermal mainstream. But, to make geothermal, the first choice mechanical system, ease of construction, ease of operation, ease of development, is there a magic bullet that we could have as an industry? You have to end with a hard question,
Well, I think, the one thing that always jumps out is schedule, because it's adding to your critical path. And even on large sites, they get small very quickly, like Zach had alluded to at One Java, when you mobilize multiple drillers and you want to use smart schedule logic and have subsequent trades follow, overlap, it becomes, we 3D modeled our below grade conditions and had it all figured out, and then it all went to hell. So it becomes very, very difficult. We got through it, but it becomes difficult to make, you've got truck routes and you've got soil staging and rigs and water tanks and hoses. So, I mean, if it's like pie of the sky, some more self-contained operation to, put the bore field in a way that is less greedy with the space it needs on our job site.
Awesome. I'm laughing a lot because every developer spends a ton of time coming up with whether it's a logistics plan or a 3D model. We got nagged on a project recently that our boreholes were only shown about 100 feet deep in Revit. We didn't show them to the full 500 feet. So we updated them. And it's a great science fair experiment. Brooke, I'm going to tell the story that they put together this 4D logistics plan. It was great. They showed it actually at the Albany conference 2 years ago. Scott Walsh ran through some slides. The site looked nothing like that. We redesigned the site around this logistics plan. Everyone was all hyped for it.
We had like 12 zones. We were going to move from zone, this zone to this zone. We did not move through those zones in any way, shape, or form.
It was a great idea. It was a great plan. I was really happy to be part of the process. I would like the month of my life back, no offense. But
I'm going to sort of answer your question. It's not really a technology thing, but one thing I will say is that what was really tough for us was the capital cost side and getting people like our equity partners and our debt partners on board with what it was. There was a lot of fear. The fact that these are very deep, the fact that they're under your slab on grade typically, the fact that this isn't a tested technology, even though it is. So it's not really a technological advance, but I'm not sure what work people are doing in this, in kind of what I'll call the financial side or the capital markets, and trying to explain the simplicity that is this technology sometimes. When you really look at it, it's very tough, but it's also a very simple concept. So, I don't know if there's any work that's being done there, but it would have been great if I didn't have to explain to 25 bankers repeatedly what geothermal is and why it's important and why it will help the building long term. So maybe. Yeah. I mean, it's it's such simple, but so hard to explain to people that don't know anything. So maybe there's a piece there.
I would always know that, Brooke had a meeting when she would text me, I'm just double checking. Our boreholes are 500 feet today, right? We didn't magically change them. Or
If I get asked a question, I'd be like, Zach.
Right, yeah, right. Frantic task. Need you now. All right, Sara.
I think it's clear that the three of us need some sort of group therapy on surviving initial attempts at geo. Yeah, I can definitely commiserate with Brooke. I remember our first geothermal project. It was like the night before closing, and our banker called, and he's like, one more question. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, I think the industry has caught up a little bit since that time. My wish list is less technical as well. I'd love to see a low-income adder under the IRA for geothermal. I hear that's in process, so thank you for all the geothermal advocates out there on the federal level. I think also really workforce training. I think Brooke kind of alluded to when they initially were looking for drillers that the universe was smaller. So I think training just for the initial installation, but also training on the back end for operations as well, and have more workforce training programs would be fantastic. And this one is a little bit more specific to some of our investments in the Rockaways. I think it's great. We heard a lot from Con Ed this morning, and Nick and Brooke had experience, and also us at L&M have had experience with Con Ed on their incentive programs pre and post change. I think we would love to see, we're doing a lot of work in LIPA territory, and we'd love to see some additional incentives coming from LIPA that are, I would say, comparable to what you're seeing in Con Ed territory.
Okay, thank you. And just on the grid impact, one thing that, I checked beforehand because I wanted to make sure I had this number correct. For both 1515 Surf and 1 Java, we did not add a winter peak for either of those buildings, and we reduced the summer peak. So winter peak is still less than summer peak. Summer peak is about 20% less than what it would have been if it was a traditional, whether, VRF air source heat pump or a boiler tower building. So from the grid side benefit and the concerns of, are we going to overload the grid? That means, Con Ed needed to build out less infrastructure for both of their projects. Potentially smaller vaults, potentially less infrastructure upgrades, potentially less work on a developer agreement in order to get the services. And there's grid side benefits that, right now we're still a summer peaking utility. So those projects immediately help the grid as a whole, where, because of utility mandates, they would be required to provide power for the projects. So at this time, I'll turn it over to John Travacco to explain the rest of the program. And I just want to give a warm thanks to, our panelists.